Hey guys, CJ. So, a lot's been going on recently, a lot of things I need to catch up on. I apologize, work's been kicking my butt, but I promise I've been working to improve myself as a data analyst so that way I can come back to you with better stuff in the future about Counterstrike data analysis. So, in order to go over some of the basic stuff before I get into what is the more topical stuff of the day, FNATIC have benched CYPHER in place of CjDoesCs after their win at Philadelphia. And that's a rather controversial topic, more into the fact that CyPHER was someone who was a rather selfless entry fragger for them, who, whatever you may believe statistically, he is one of the individuals who helped them achieve their qualification to the major. Now, many people, the more common comparison to this has been Brokey last season, who helped FaZe, in theory, achieve their qualification to the Austin major, and then was benched in place of Simple for playing at the major. I think there's a fine line difference between someone who has found most of their relevance through the Into the Breach roster that made their run at Paris, and I've made my thoughts at Paris about Paris very, very known about the fact that it's one of the weakest major playoffs of all time, who would then go on to play for Kassad's team Bleed and find his way into now this team in FNATIC. There's a difference between him and Grand Slam major winning Opper Brokey. One would think that major Grand Slam winning Opper Brokey would be treated with a tad more respect in this comparison, but I think it is more important to provide those opportunities and respect to the individuals who have not achieved the same things. FNATIC is more becoming a remake of the former Passion UA roster that performed well at, or relatively well at, the Shanghai Major, as I've discussed before, along with Crims and Blame F still being within the roster. Blame F, the wayward son of Danish Counterstrike, and Crims, the legend that he is. Beyond that, I just think it's a bad look for the organization overall. Making this roster move is not going to change your placing at the major, in my opinion, and is not going to suddenly make you in contention for the major. So give the dude what he earned. That's my opinion, but it's also potentially a bit too soft in terms of what one would want for a traditional GM from a team. Whatever. Much more topical and modern day stuff is that OG has announced the benching of Chrisen and CjDoes. Now, as long-time viewers of the channel would know, I will always pull for CjDoes as one of my favorite hybrids within the scene, and to see him benched is rather sad, and to see Chrisen, a up-and-coming Danish IGL, benched seemingly out of the blue, I think is a rather bad look for what I think, in it, me and Bucket have discussed before, is the best OG team we have seen in quite some time. But they have benched these two players ahead of their unconfirmed, officially announced by the organization, but announced by HLTV and other various sources, the signing of Cadian. Cadian, who is a prestigious IGL, but an opping IGL. Whatever you may think of that within the modern day of Counter-Strike, even Fallen has given it up to Molodoy in order to be a more effective rifling IGL within the modern day, and Cadian gave up his op in place to IGL for Astralis for a little bit of time. To see him come back as an opping IGL for OG makes me curious about who they're potentially going to sign to replace the additional rifling role within the team. But this is the type of level that one would expect from an IGL of Cadian's pedigree when attempting to rebuild their brand, as he has been and was an IGL that challenged for the biggest titles in the world, potentially even, being someone who fumbled a major going as far back as the Brazilian major in Rio, which was won by Outsiders, that in theory, if you're going by the themes of that year and the teams that were playing well within that year, that should have been a Gambit heroic major. But either way, he's attempting to rebuild his brand and rebuild his value within this OG roster, which, if he is able to pull off with the lessons he learned from his time in Team Liquid, would be very, very interesting to see. Beyond that, I think Chrisen is still one for the future. He's a very young IGL and someone that should be entirely capable of going somewhere else and should be picked up somewhere else. And for CjDoes, at this point in his career, I think it's well understood that he is a hybrid who is potentially even stronger on the rifle than he is on the op. And if he could go somewhere as a secondary opper, give me a young primary opper, really strange shout. minus CjDoesCs plus CjDoes would be very interesting for Nip, because you know, between him and Wrinkle, those are two both solid oppers and a very strong rifling addition to the team as well. But either way, I think CjDoes still has quite a lot to offer a number of different teams as a rifler, and if he's willing to give up that sort of hard carry star mentality that has been his MO for a number of years, I think he could very easily find a place within a number of different organizations. But moving on from OG in general, we have the Bucharest playoffs. So Bucharest has been a rather interesting tournament purely for the fact that I don't even really know how to say it. There's just not a lot of important teams, and that's somewhat insulting to say, but it's not untrue. You know, our playoffs for this are the new Heroic, you know, after the loss of, goodness gracious, Great Balls of Fire, to Nier, to Spirit. They bring up Nilo. They have X-Floud come back. Heroic has been sort of in the wilderness for a couple months now after their rather strong start to the year with their roster. We have Gamer Legion, Bait, who are the perennial, you know, edge of top 15, top 10-ish team that they are, being the Ukrainian predominant team that they are. Aurora, who realistically, from how they have played within this tournament, should not be in playoffs, and my thoughts on Aurora are pretty well known. But at this point, I do genuinely think a roster change, specifically for Major, is necessary in order for this team to remain competitive into the future. You have Pain, a top 4 team from the Austin Major, who has struggled to reproduce and recapture that form, but as rather pointed out by Dust Moran, we have seen changes within Snow's positioning for this event, which has seen him provide some additional output after a long slump for the young anchor, which is very heartening to see. We have Legacy once again showing up again at a, you know, I'm not going to say tier 1 event. I feel like this is tier 1.5 with the lack of overall pretty much every single important team being here. I guess this is what we could call a tier 2 tournament nowadays. It's rather crazy. It's strange to call it that, but it's not untrue in many cases. There are maybe 2 to 3 top 10 teams here in the world, and that's just how it is. But we also have Team Liquid, who, after the recent re-edition of a Liege in their trade for Twists, I think is the shoe-in to win this tournament. And if they don't, you know, it's obviously still very new within this roster's lifetime, but Nerds has come out within several interviews to say that him and Elige play Counterstrike in a very similar way and have very similar thought processes. Someone who's more willing to commit to Shuhei's system, potentially, versus Twists and how the team has been played previously. I think it was an overall beneficial swap for both Liquid and FaZe to make, and I think anything other than a Grand Finals appearance for Liquid within this tournament is a failure, and honestly, they should be the shoe-in to win this. And it would be a great, you know, trophy pickup ahead of the Major for this team and for this organization that has been in a trophy drought for quite a number of years. You know, there have been a number of different iterations of Team Liquid that have looked competitive, or at least had the potential to win a trophy, within my opinion. You know, NAF still dreams of that refreshed 1v5, like, whatever. But their first quarterfinal opponent is Saw, who is somehow still hanging on after the loss of CjDoesCs and Aerostos, who are now respectively on OG and NIP. It's a very interesting playoffs to see. I believe at this point, if I'm going to just base it, it should either be, you know, from this side of the bracket, it should be Pain or Liquid in the grand finals, and then it should be Heroic or Aurora in the grand finals from the other side of the bracket. Otherwise, I think it would be a considerable failure for Aurora or a considerable failure for Liquid. Pain and Heroic have a bit more wiggle room as they're still finding their stability within their younger rosters. Heroic more so as they have had to deal with roster changes, more likely. But I believe Gamer Legion could potentially show us up. We don't really know. Otherwise, there's been quite a lot going on within the scene right now. You know, I hope everyone's doing rather well. It's been quite an interesting time to watch some CS. Let me know down below what you guys think of the upcoming playoffs for Bucharest. What do you think of OG swapping out their young Danish IGL for an old Danish IGL, having to swap 2 players to accommodate his playstyle? And let me know what you think of the entire FNATIC situation, whether you believe it is the general manager cutthroat right move to make, or whether you believe the sentimentality of allowing CyPHER to remain within the roster in order to fulfill his roles and play at the major that he helped the team earn. It's rather difficult to see. Also, while I'm thinking about it, shout out to Astralis, who somehow almost beat Aurora with Rugga playing in place of Device, who had terrible food poisoning. But otherwise, I have been CJ. It's been great seeing you guys. Have a great rest of your day.